So, a little while back, I decided to finally get off my ass and release a review of Grand Blue Fantasy Relink. I don't know why I'm saying a while back, it was just a week ago. Anyways, I was sitting on the demo video for a good while, and after finally getting that video out, which thank you, by the way, for all the support for that, oh my god, that was incredible, I had decided that I was going to finish up the last of the demo reel videos I needed to do, and put out a video that was reserved for none other than my review of Eternights. A game that when it was first ever announced, I didn't really think it looked very good. I thought the trailers left a lot to be desired, but hey, a full 3D action RPG with gameplay elements inspired from the Persona series admittedly did get me a bit curious. But I was never fully sold on the product. Hell, even when the demo released, I admittedly still wasn't all that blown away. I knew that if I wanted to actually play this, I was going to need a pretty big incentive, or to get it when it was like 90% off or something. So I did the smartest thing a money-hungry piece of shit like me does, and I made it into a sub-goal on my Twitch. That goal was eventually met, thank you Peyton, and I played through the entire thing on stream. And after finishing it, it was certainly one of the games of all time. Yeah, I'm ripping off the band-aid here real quick. I had a lot, and I mean a lot of problems with this game. Now, I usually try my best to be nicer towards indie products, because they're not really working with a AAA budget or team, so I'm usually fine if their flaws are a little more apparent than the average big budget project. But this game was just oof. So I guess that also begs the question here of, what did this game even do that made me dislike it so much? Does it even have a redeemable quality to it? Or is this just a big waste of my time outside of making some money off of it on Twitch? Well, why don't we wrap up this surprisingly long intro and get into my video. I'm Crimson Rosso, and welcome to my review of Eternights. As admittedly kind of funny and half-tempted I am to just skip this section and completely dog on the multiple issues I thought this title had, I do think there are some things that are worth praise, so let's just spend a little bit of time talking about them. For one, some of the visuals in this game are kinda nice. Now, while the overall game looks like that, there were some things I appreciate about the visuals, as I do admittedly respect the fact that this guy didn't just try to make another 2D pixel art RPG, and tried to actually make a full 3D game. Like, yeah, I love pixel art, and HD 2D, alongside the big pixel art retro boom for RPGs, is definitely my favorite style you could ever make for a game. But I do have to give credit where credit is due. He actually tried to go for a different style. Plus, even if these 3D models weren't the best, I do think the 2D cutscenes he had animated for this game, and some of the art you could find throughout the title, does look pretty nice. It definitely wears its anime influence on its sleeve, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You can also feel that kind of inspiration in the gameplay as well, which, like the visuals, have a lot of problems, but it does have a few things I think are worthy of praise. For one, there's actually a pretty decent amount of options in terms of combat. Yeah, you have one combo throughout the entire game with a focus on light and heavy attack mixing, but through unlocking multiple skills, it does open up as you gain access to stuff like death blows and parries. Alongside this, you can also unlock special skills like Stinger, summoning 3 swords, and other various healing and AoE attacks through interacting with your party members that you meet throughout the game. I like the fact that it actually gives you a reason to interact with your party members other than just dating them. Like spending time with Yuna gives you access to better healing skills, or hanging out with Yona lets you fill up your elemental gauge faster. And speaking of that little elemental gauge I just mentioned, it's actually really valuable to combat, because once you fill it up, you can launch a super attack of one of 4 elements that is used to destroy the barriers around certain enemies and bosses in order to deal heavy amounts of damage to them. It's especially important because interacting with your party members and getting more of these skills makes the progressions of the dungeons you run through a lot easier, as the more skills you have, the easier it is to take out the enemies coming at you. It's not exactly an award-winning system. I wouldn't really say the gameplay goes past serviceable levels of quality, honestly, but it does admittedly have a decent amount of depth under it once you actually look under the hood. Also, I like the fact that this guy added in some puzzle solving to his game. A lot of modern day RPGs are all just about running through dungeons and killing stuff, and look, I'm all for that, but it is nice to see a game try to go like, no, you can't progress unless you can figure out this puzzle. I'm not a huge fan of how meta some of the jokes are with them, but I did enjoy my time with the puzzles, which is admittedly more than I can say about the story or its characters. They're both pretty mediocre and have some issues, but for the guy's first ever story in game, I guess he could have done worse. Like, I'm gonna warn you right now, don't go into this expecting any of these characters or story points to really move you or anything. I've got a lot of issues I'll be talking about later with both of them, but at the end of the day, it's a decently serviceable story with issues. And that also kind of goes the same for the soundtrack, which isn't awful or anything, but I wouldn't really say any songs stuck out to me. I think the only one that really did was the final boss theme, and yeah, that's about it. Other than that, I really don't have a lot of other positives to say, so I'm just going to go straight into talking about my cons now. Alright, let's not kid ourselves here. We all know you were here for this section. So let's stop dilly-dallying and get into these issues one by one. First off, the visuals. Boy, oh boy, this game is rough to look at. 2D animation and art aside, this game's 3D's visuals are almost painful to look at points. Not only is everything you explore and look at basically the same combination of color hues mixed together with some painfully bad lighting to the point where it just legit hurts my eyes to look at some points, but all of the models, from the characters to the buildings, either look bland or just plain bad. If I had to pick, I'd say the worst looking thing in the game is probably the character models when they're doing the 3D zoom on their faces with the chat bubbles. Because without them, they actually don't look that bad, just a little boring. But whenever the camera zooms in on them when they're talking, yikes, you can see the cheapness. All of the close-ups look like somebody just bought that VTuber studio thing and then made their first debut model VTuber, but didn't know how to ring it, and it just only has a few expressions, and was like, alright, here we go, we're done, we're ready, ship this out, boss. It almost seems like they were meant to be 2D models at points with certain expressions they make, but they couldn't decide on a good PNG for that, and just decided to go, hey, what if we did close-ups of the faces instead? Alongside this, I'm not really certain why they decided to have the close-up faces be talking while the model was talking at the same time, because it really isn't unique, it's just like super distracting, and I'm pretty sure that just adds more work where you didn't need to add it. And while I have been rambling on about the cast members not looking all that great, enemies, like I said earlier, don't really escape it either. They're all just so repetitive in their design. It's kind of the issue that the Atelier franchise actually has, but at the very least they change up the formula a little bit for their monsters by changing the color schemes and making some of the backgrounds look nice and different. Whereas Eternights does not really try to do that, which in turn makes this game feel very, very visually forgettable. And that's really all I have to say about the visuals. They're not very good. Nothing was really all that impressive outside of the 2D cutscenes, so how about we get into my issues with gameplay next? For starters, let's talk about the combat itself, because it is one of the most weightless things I have ever touched. Now, I did give credit to it earlier about at least it being semi-competent once you unlock all of your abilities. Unfortunately, that's all offset by the fact that it just never really feels all that good to play, mainly due to the fact that no hit really feels like it has a satisfactory weight behind it. It's less like you're swinging around a sword that's killing people, and more or less feels like you're just swinging around a giant pool noodle instead. Even the parries and death blows, things that, should feel the heaviest and most powerful, just are kind of pathetic in this game. Like, every time I would execute him, it just had the same weightless feel to everything. Like, for example, think of action games like Ninja Gaiden, the Batman Arkham series, or Bayonetta, where the big special takedown death animation, well, I guess not death for Batman, has this satisfactory power to them that makes you feel good for executing it when you did. This game does not have that, no matter whether you're doing a parry, death blow, or combo finisher. The only thing that has any sort of weight to it is the elemental strikes. And those kind of have their own issues where you have to use them for shield breaking. Now, the shield breaking, I guess, isn't a bad mechanic. It does admittedly do a pretty good job of incentivizing the player to actually pay attention to the elements they're using, so they don't get repetitive and just spam the same thing over and over. However, it becomes a massive pain in the ass when it's utilized in boss fights, because unlike normal enemies, you can't multi-stack shield breaks, so you have to break them one at a time. That means boss fights basically revolve around you doing 0 damage for about the first half of them, and having to execute the same elemental attack 3 times in a row, and then you can actually hurt them. It gets really tedious really fast. And unfortunately, breaking the shield doesn't really make the boss fight all that better. It's cool that you can stun them into combos and drain their health immensely fast if you know what you're doing, but I really don't think that minute or so of satisfaction is worth the 3 to 7 it takes to get there. It's a mechanic that never gets satisfying no matter how long you spend with the game. And funnily enough, despite all of my complaining, those aren't even my biggest issues with gameplay. No, my biggest issue is how many mechanics are in this game that just kind of contradict the entire playstyle. An example of this is how they take elements from Persona, where they have timed dungeons for you to go through. And like Persona, They also do that thing where if you leave the dungeon at one of the save points, you can get all of your health and SP back. And your SP is important as it's the only way you can actually heal yourself. Now on its own, this isn't really an awful mechanic, but like I said earlier, this game contradicts itself heavily throughout two major aspects. One, this kind of mechanic doesn't really work when you're making an action RPG. Like in a game like Persona, it kind of makes sense, right? Since it's turn-based, you have to mentally pick and choose when you're going to utilize your SP at the right moments for both attacks and healing. As you get further in, you start asking yourself, alright, do I want to use up more SP and take the risk of not having it for the next tough battle? Or do I cut my losses, go to a save room, and just leave? Lose a day on my calendar, sure, but I come back with full health and can get further. In Eternights, that really isn't an issue because you can already just dodge the pretty easy to follow attack patterns and not take damage from anything. The only real problem is that some attacks do have some pretty wonky hitboxes. Like sometimes it'll expect you to dodge right at the second it's about to hit you, but it's like, well actually you need to do this before they swing the weapon, which makes that much more confusing than it needs to be. But even with that, this game is so pathetically easy, even on a hard difficulty run, that you never really have to feel any fear of using up your SP or having to leave more than maybe once. Hell, the whole system is even more contradictory because even when you're at low health with no SP, all you really have to do is let an enemy kill you and you just spawn back at a checkpoint with all your health back. Like, I'm not a master designer or anything, but doesn't that kind of fucking invalidate leaving to have to restore yourself? Hell, if you just tough it out and make it to the boss, you get all your SP back anyway, so what the hell's the point of even leaving if I can just, throw my character's corpse at enemies until I get past all of them? I get wanting to emulate a franchise you like because you were inspired by them, but you gotta make sure you do it right, because if you don't, you end up with problems like this. And before you ask, none of the boss fights are worth going through this game. Not only do they have the annoying ass shield problem I mentioned earlier, but some of these boss patterns are just not fun to fight. The worst one was the Act 3 boss fight, where whenever he hits you, he can also just immediately cast lightning on the ground and you can't dodge out of it. So you just take free damage because of the lightning strike, and it's just, it's so frustrating. I actually think a good portion of my deaths in this playthrough happened to that boss just because of how bullshit the whole thing was. Hell, I haven't even brought up all the times they try to shoehorn in different gameplay mechanics to try to keep it more interesting, like the stealth sections or running from mobs, but they're so unbalanced they lead to some of the worst parts of the game. Like the moment where you lose your arm in the last act and can't find it anymore, so you have to go past all of the enemies to find the person who was kidnapped, but they all just swarm you anyways no matter how quiet you're being, so you just end up getting your ass beat and you just gotta pray to RNGesus you get past them fast enough. Just run before they kill you. The entire gameplay loop really just reeks of not knowing when to stop putting in mechanics. And I really think the guy working on it should have had somebody to tell him not to add things at points and just focus on the 4 or 5 mechanics instead of turning this game into 13 different things. As you can also feel those problems in all of the side content that you can do when you bond with the characters. Like every party member comes with their own minigame and scavenging event for an item, and boy, they get boring really fast. I really think he could have cut the scavenger hunts down to half and added some more difficulty options for the minigames to at least make them less of a pain in the ass slog to go through. And the worst part is you can't really skip any of these because the minigames are the only real way you can get white essence for character skills. Yay! So look, I'll give them flowers for giving me a reason to interact with these cast members. It still ends up being one of the most boring parts of the entire gameplay loop. Alright, what else is there? Oh yeah, let's talk about the characters in the story. Okay, so first off, the cast. I'll say this is the thing I had the least problems with, but I wouldn't really say any of them are all that engaging. They're not terrible, mind you. They're just not really all that interesting or unique. They have their own little stories that you can follow, and personally, I didn't give a shit about any of them. None of them were really all that gripping, and I think part of that falls down to this game's pacing issues. Eternights is not a long game. If you don't get stuck on any of the bosses or puzzles, you can beat the game in maybe 8 to 10 hours. As a result of this, the entire narrative and all of the characters move at a lightning fast pace, comparable to something like fucking Demon Slayer. And that means nothing in the story really sticks as a result, because every story beat is slingshotted past for another in an obsessive need to keep the ball rolling. They try to have a couple cooldown moments to let character moments sink in, but because everything moves at such a lightning fast pace, even those don't get a whole lot of time to shine. As a result of this, nothing really sinks in, and all of the cast members feel inherently one note from all of the relationships you can form with them. Also, one thing that kind of got on my nerves was that they do this thing at the end where if you formed a relationship with the characters, they can actually get taken by the main antagonist if you pick them, and you have to go through the entire last hour of the game, including the final boss, without them. So if you were like me and formed a bond with Yuna, aka your only healer in the entire fucking game, she got taken, and you're no longer allowed to heal. Yeah, I had to beat the final boss of this game with no healer on hard mode. No matter how easy this game actually is in hindsight, this was one of the biggest pains in the ass I had to put up with. Those aren't my only issues with this game's writing, because admittedly, this game's humor is rough. Now, I'm not against a game trying to be silly or funny. I actually really like it when a pretty serious narrative knows when to not take itself too seriously. It's why Trails is one of my favorite franchises in terms of writing. It has these immensely deep, serious plots, but it's not afraid to make some jokes along the way. Unfortunately, I don't think the devs at Eternite really have the sense of humor I like, as a lot of the jokes are very hit or miss. The creator really seems to like sex jokes, and while those definitely can be funny, I feel like the delivery of a lot of these lines is just not that good. When the game lets you pick your own choices, it can actually be pretty humorous to imagine your character just saying this shit, but man, when it tries to tell its own jokes, they really fall flat. I will concede that this is more a personal taste thing, so don't take it as seriously as some of the other complaints. Alright, that's everything I had to say in terms of the issues with this game, so let's get into my final thoughts. Eternights, I think, is a perfect example of how far passion can take somebody. This guy, despite everything I've been saying in this video, released a game and was able for it to do pretty well, all things considered, in terms of sales. However, I do think this game should also be a great reminder of what happens when you're too overambitious with your passion project. I get it, alright? It's your first time getting to actually take a swing at the big industry, and that's very exciting. You obviously want to make a splash with your first ever real big title. But man, I really do think he needed someone to just tell him to take a step back on like half the shit he put in here. Because, good God, it got exhausting to put up with. Even with all of my complaints, though, I do want to say that I still respect the fact that he, actually put something out there. And with how well the game sold, I really hope he takes these lessons and puts them to heart for whatever his next title is if he, for some ungodly reason, decides to watch this video. For now, though, I really don't have an issue giving this game a pretty low 3.5 out of 10. Check it out if you're, super genuinely curious. But if not, I really see no reason to get it. And that brings us to the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm glad I could finally get the rest of my demo reel videos done before the year was up. And now I can focus on some of my other content. Who knows, maybe the next video is something more positive. What do I got planned? Oh no. Gotta get to work. But if you guys want to support my content because you liked what you saw here, do me a favor and like and subscribe down below. Leave a comment if you want to help me out with the algorithm or if you just want to chat. And if you want to support me or hang out with my community, make sure to check out my Twitch or hell, donate to my Patreon. That's all, folks. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time for more RPG content.